Neena Bhaskar is head of HR at Cooper Vision for Singapore, Malaysia, and Southeast Asia. In her earlier roles, she's worked in HR at pharma and fintech companies. Given her experience as a coach and her work in talent and culture, we spoke to Neena about culture debt, how companies end up accruing culture debt, and what is the price companies pay for accruing culture debt. We also spoke about the role of empathy, how managers and leaders can build trust and practice empathy, especially in a remote first world. If you're curious about how an HR practitioner views culture debt and what they recommend organizations to do about it, you'll want to listen to this one.
This is the CTQ Smartcast, where we have conversations about upleveling, deliberate practice, and getting future relevant.
So, welcome Neena, welcome to the CTQ Smartcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Harish.
Yeah. So, starting with a slightly tough one, we talk about debt. People know about debt in the financial sense. People also understand debt in terms of technical debt, right? So, if you just describe debt as borrowing from your future self, um, let's talk about culture debt. So, culture debt is short-term decisions that will impact the company culture in the longer term. So, how do companies end up, incurring culture debt, and what are the implications or the price that companies can pay for incurring the culture debt?
So, you mentioned right now the technical debt and the usual debt that we know of. So, when you talk about culture debt, when a company chooses to overlook the company culture in times of growth and expansion, and it happens a lot with startups, that's when a company incurs culture debt. And unlike what we understand of debt, which is tangible, culture debt is invisible, and it can have huge impacts on an organization. So if it's not recognized in time, it can primarily have such an impact on the organization that it doesn't exist. And why it happens is because organizations, when they are on high accelerated growth, either there is no HR function, or it's a very basic level HR function where all they're doing is dishing out letters, but there is no solid framework, there is no processes, policies, or guidelines to support that high accelerated growth. And
Right.
uh, when you ask about the implications, as I said, that it could be very scary because you could be dealing with turnover, you could be dealing with low morale, low productivity. There could be legal implications, there could be cost implications, and all of this could lead to having an impact on your branding, your reputation, which eventually can kill your business.
Right. Yeah. So, as you were saying, what came out was that these are all small things, small compromises that you make, which sort of add up over a period of time, and then suddenly it hits you. So, can you give some more concrete examples of what are these kind of compromises that we're talking about? Are these in terms of hiring, the way things are being done in the company? Can you give some concrete examples of these compromises?
So definitely hiring. So, a lot of times when you're hiring, you're just focusing on technical skills. You're not focusing on if it's the right fit in terms of leadership qualities, in terms of certain cultural attributes. So when you overlook those things, and when you hire somebody just for technical capabilities, it's great because with startups, let's say you have to get the product out, so you have somebody who comes and builds your product, and it's great. But what happens once the product is out? What happens when you're bringing in more people? What happens to the culture then? And that's when organizations go back and look at who they've hired, what happened. And that's too late, because by then either that leader has brought in people who are just like him, which kind of shapes the culture of the organization, which becomes difficult to change then, or there is a lot of attrition, there is a lot of retention issue in the organization because people who align with the culture that you have don't survive because the leader that you hired possibly is not aligned to the culture that you have. So
Right.
definitely hiring. Lack of processes and policies. I've seen lack of processes in place. So let's say an exit case, a lever. If you don't have things to document, if you don't have data to support, people can actually sue you. They can take you to court, and they can, and that also means that if you don't have processes in place, your managers don't know what to do. So if your managers don't know how to deal with an exit situation and they don't know how to document it right, you can actually, be playing into the hands of somebody who's leaving the organization, and certainly leaving the organization not on a good note.
Right, right. Yeah. So, like you said, these are all, sort of things that people want to do in the short term. They want to get someone in because they need to roll out the product or this feature or something like that. But eventually they realize that no, this was, probably a wrong decision when they go back, right? That is good for realization. We know that a lot of companies might actually be in this state right now, right? Where in the last 2 years, it was easy to raise a lot of funding. So they got in people, had to show traction to investors. So they did, make these kind of compromises. Now, instead of looking back, if you were to project forward, right, you've realized that, okay, the decision may not have been great. What do you do now?
So once an organization has realized that they have a good culture debt, uh, you know the first thing they should do is they should make it visible. They should be candid. They should be honest with the employees about what has happened, why it has happened. Own it up. That's very important, because if you are suffering from culture debt, that also means that there is a huge impact on trust in the organization. So owning things up is going to at least, instill some level of confidence in your people that you are aware of what's happening and you're going to take steps to mitigate whatever risk is involved, or at least reduce it. The second thing is, aside from making it visible, ask your people, what do they want? How do they feel? When you talk about psychological safety at work, are they in a position to voice their opinions? Will they be heard? So that is very important, because every single voice in an organization matters. And if you don't make your employees feel that, then it's a problem. You would not know what you really need to work on. You can say you have a culture debt, but what is it? What do you need to work on? Then, as I mentioned earlier, not just hire for technical skills, but hire for culture fit too. And I'm not saying that managers need to bring in somebody similar to them. You need, diversity, you need that uniqueness, but somebody who aligns with the values, be it accountability, be it integrity, be it, doing right when no one is watching. It could be any of the values that your organization lives by. You see those elements in somebody that you're trying to hire. And starting at the top, you know we say that things shouldn't be top down, but in this case it should be top down, because you need to have competent leaders. You need to have leaders who are invested in people's growth, people who are emotionally intelligent, to understand how teams operate, what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses, how can they make them feel safe at workplace and allow them to grow.
Right. So, two follow-up questions on this. One is, are there any quantitative measures that founders or leaders can use? It could be, something like an ENPS, or what should they be looking for in employee satisfaction surveys to get a sense of this? Because, this cannot be just a very, intuitive thing, right? That, yeah, I think there is some culture debt. That's not something which people are comfortable with as using a means for deciding on things like this. So, what are the measures that people can look at?
So there are so many things that you can do, but to start off with, something as simple as, just do a small survey. If you are a startup, you don't want to incur a lot of cost. You have so many online survey tools available. Monkey Survey is the cheapest and the easiest one, isn't it? And everyone has been using it. So, start a small survey, try to find out the pulse of the organization. Organizations do global engagement surveys, which is done annually or every 2 years. That is a great tool. uh, NPS, as you mentioned, they can do an ENPS, and that's a great tool, because NPS scores are not just for businesses or customers, it's also for employees, and it gives you a good understanding of where your organization sits, whether somebody who's working within the organization will be willing to recommend or refer a friend or an acquaintance to join your organization. They could be working with you for monetary reasons. They could be working with you because they have some reasons because of which they're tied to the organization. But are they willing to refer somebody? Are they willing to say, are they proud of the organization they're working with? Are they willing to go out and say, yes, this is the organization that I'm working with, and I'm not going to go to any other organization? When it comes to some tools that leaders or founders can use in terms of getting the pulse of the organization, is there are so many surveys available, and the cheapest and the most commonly used one is SurveyMonkey, right? So if you were to use that, and if you were to do a quarterly survey, you can find out what your employees are feeling, how they're feeling. And it could be about some changes that you made. It could be about some new introductions. It could be about some restructuring. It could be about some new developments. It could be about moving into new markets. It could be about anything. It could even be about some small engagement activity, but trying to understand whether they are on board with it, trying to understand whether what you're doing, are they liking it? And also for startups, trying to understand if the employees still aligned with the vision that you started with, because many a times when startups start, there is a vision, and then it gets diluted, and then it goes to something else. And people who joined, I would say, the ship in the beginning of the journey, they feel that the direction that they thought this organization will be going to, it's not happening anymore. So trying to get a sense of understanding about what the employees feel, you can do it very easily. NPS surveys are good. I think that allows you to get an understanding about your own reputation in the organization. And, one thing that I really like about NPS is, if I was to ask an employee who's in the organization, if you would refer somebody to join us, if they say no, then they are not with the organization out of loyalty. They are in the organization because of some compulsion or something which is holding them back from moving to another good opportunity, or possibly they are waiting for another good opportunity and that has not happened yet.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, is there any recommended time or size of the company when you get started with something like this? What would you advise founders?
For startups, you can use SurveyMonkey. That's available for anybody to use, and you can do it quarterly. That's going to help you figure out, how your employees are adapting to the change, because startups are highly dynamic and flexible, and things change every day. That has been my experience, that I could be working on a deck today, and tomorrow I'm told that that's not what we want because a certain direction has changed, right? So every quarter. When it comes to bigger organizations, the usual norm is they do global engagement surveys, and these surveys happen every year or every 2 years. And then in between, you may also have your biannual survey, which could be through SurveyMonkey or some other form or tool. But bigger organizations, when they do these global engagement surveys, that's usually through some external vendors or partners, like
Right.
Gartners of the world, where you're using their specific set of questions, and there is a method of calculating the responses, which is then put into action for the next 1 or 2 years, so that before the next survey comes in, those pain areas or pain points you have worked on.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The second question that had come to mind with your previous answer was that there may be some skill gap as well, right? For, say, managers to be more empathetic. They may want to be more empathetic, but they're just not able to do it. They've not been, it could be an unknown unknown, or it could be a known unknown for some people. And learning, especially in case of a startup, would probably be lower in the list of priorities. But you and I know that it is important enough to actually change the course of the whole company. So how do you then reconcile between these competing priorities of, yeah, we need to ship out, yes, there is intent, the person doesn't mean bad, but actions are not really helping? Then how do you sort of reconcile this situation? What can you advise the founders about this?
This is something that I've observed, and this is not just with startups.
Right.
Uh, I personally know people who are great when it comes to execution, when it comes to leading teams to accomplish objectives, but when it comes to emotional intelligence piece, they face challenges. So for them, it's a mix of unknown, and known unknown, because they don't know how to navigate through this. And not everyone is, highly emotionally intelligent, and that's okay, because if we were to have everybody same, then we won't have unique perspectives, right? But I think when we talk about leaders being trying to be a bit more emotionally intelligent, they can look at going for programs where there are tools or methods or avenues for them to explore how they can be more emotionally intelligent. They can possibly take up some coaching, where coaching is a process where you're uh, allowing somebody to be on a self discovery process, so allowing them to see from other person's perspective, so that they realize that when they respond in a certain matter or certain situation, how the other person is receiving it, right? uh, I do believe that you can listen to a lot of podcasts and you can read a lot, but unless you have some practical implementation. And when we say putting yourself into their shoes,
Hmm.
when you go on that self discovery journey and you try to do a role play sort of a thing, where you're really putting yourself into their shoes and trying to
Hmm.
see how would you feel if you were to get a certain response, that could help. So that is what I would say, because trainings are one thing, but it's about trying to find out that how somebody feels. How do you do that? So that could be through coaching conversation. That could be through open conversation,
Hmm.
and that is something that I truly recommend where I work. That if you're facing challenges with your manager, and let's say one person is emotionally intelligent, quite high there, but the manager isn't, my recommendation to the employee or the team member is go have a conversation. Tell them you need this space. Tell them this space is needed not for work, but to have a candid conversation, and tell them what you need. Tell them you can't go beyond this if you don't have this. And tell them that, this is the support they need for you to get to perform to your best of your ability.
Right.
And I can tell you that it has worked.
Hmm.
People have felt more comfortable with their managers. I've received feedback where they've said, it kind of opened, conversations in a more informal manner, and I feel more relaxed now.
Hmm. Hmm. Right. We spoke about managers and leaders getting coaching, but how can leaders and managers become good coaches for their teams? What do you recommend for that?
So I think personally, I feel coaching has become a very, very important leadership trait of late. And why I say off late is because even though coaching as a science has been there for more than a decade, its importance, relevance has only come into light in the last 5 to 6 years,
Hmm.
and more so during the pandemic. So I feel managers have realized that how a coaching culture leads to higher productivity, higher engagement. There is loyalty, there is retention, versus a culture which is top down. And in the last 2 years, we've heard this term called Great Resignation, which is now being called Great Reshuffling. Because if you realize, it's not that people left the organization because they wanted to leave work. They just did not want to work under certain leadership styles,
Right.
certain ways of working, which is why they're going back to workforce, but they're not going back to the same organizations. So when you ask me how managers and leaders can be effective coaches, the first thing is to display a high level of emotional intelligence, which is only and only possible if they work on improving, as I mentioned earlier, their level of emotional intelligence. Because when you work on your emotional intelligence, it allows you to firstly understand how you react, you respond, and then it allows you to understand others, their emotions, and come from a place of non-judgment. That can only happen if you get into a space where you're not trying to judge somebody, because if you're trying to judge someone, they're also going to get defensive, and that's going to fail the entire process of be it coaching or be it trying to build a relationship.
Hmm.
uh, some things that I can share, because I'm a certified coach, and some things that I do or some of my peers do. When you're in a coaching conversation, you listen more, you speak less. So it's a 30-70 combination. So a coach would typically speak for 25 to 30%, and 70% is by the client. So they are in the driver's seat and they decide the direction of the conversation, right? Managers should try to act as a sounding board and not a space where they know all the answers, because then you're becoming, then you're not empowering them. You see a problem, you give them the solution, and then you expect them to come up with solutions. How is that possible? That is not possible. uh, in coaching, we do ask a lot of hows and whats, open-ended questions. How did this happen? Why did this happen? So, showing that level of curiosity, that is very important, because when you ask hows and whats, that's when they think deeper and they try to figure out, okay, why did this happen? Because many a times people don't think about hows and whats. You just come up with something and they say, oh, this happened. But how did this happen, or what happened? Right? Creating a space where, as I said, thinking beyond and, asking a question. So if somebody says, how should I solve this issue? Uh, you may want to ask, how do you think you will solve it? And letting them know it's okay. No answer is wrong. We're just trying to brainstorm. And possibly the answer that I give you, but the answer that you give me could be better than mine. So building that space and, you know, uh, asking for challenges, it's very, very important. Even in coaching conversations, we do that. When we set a goal with a client, we always ask, what are the roadblocks that you see? And then we look at, support or resources to overcome those roadblocks. And lastly, there is no coaching conversation that happens without accountability. You need to have an action, you need to have an accountability. That could be individual and that could be shared. But there has to be an accountability so that they know what is it that they are going to achieve.
Yeah, yeah. So you mentioned over the last 2 years. So can you also talk about some of the challenges that came up in the last 2 years and how you overcame, or you saw others overcome in the process of coaching their team members with the pandemic, and because I don't think this seems to be ending anytime soon. Some of the challenges seem to be there for good. So that would be an interesting take for people to know about.
So some of the key challenges I think everyone faced, especially people who work in corporate setups or who run organizations, was the remote working.
Right.
So, and when you're remote working, how do you trust people? Because we all based our trust on the basis of seeing and meeting people. If somebody's in the office, you trust them. If somebody's seen working in the office, you trust them. So visibility was one thing that was kind of the basis or the foundation of trust pre-pandemic, isn't it? So some of the key challenges I think people faced was building that trust or having that trust on teams. Showing empathy. Now, how do you show empathy when you can't give a pat on somebody's back, when you can't shake hands with somebody, right? So empathy became a big question mark or point of conversation. Then, how do you keep the teams engaged? How do you keep them motivated? What do you do to bring that stickiness back into within the teams, into the organization? So these were, I think, key things, because these were the things that kind of forced leaders to also think about how do we retain people. Because the great resignation thing, as I said earlier, started happening, and then everyone was saying, oh, it's because we are not meeting each other, it's because employees don't see each other, so they are not engaged. But that is not really the reason. People can still be engaged in a remote setup. It's about how do leaders, how much do they invest? Do they schedule meetings and talk about the meetings, and then at the end of the meeting they decide the outcomes and then they disconnect? Or are they taking additional time to invest in people? Are they making personal time with people, having those conversations? So you can get personal with your employees, you don't have to get private. Right? So
Right.
as long as you understand that,
Hmm.
and you can make space for that time, that bonding, these challenges won't be there. But these are some of the key challenges that I saw.
I think that's a great line that I'm going to steal from you. You can get personal but not private. Yeah. So, taking this to at a larger scale, right? How can companies ensure their culture and values are actually being practiced by people? What can you do at a more institutional, if you want to call it, institutional level to ensure people are practicing these? What can companies do about it?
So it's about walking the talk, isn't it? We always say, they should walk the talk. So it's about walking the talk. But when we say walk the talk, what is it? Firstly, having a clear purpose. I think the way the world has changed, and we see people joining different kinds of organizations or industries versus where they were before. People want to work with organizations who serve a higher purpose and who have a sense of purpose.
Hmm.
So, being very clear about your purpose and your direction, that's very important. And being able to celebrate that. Because if you have a good purpose, if you have a clear purpose, but you're not celebrating it, who's seeing it? Who's going to join you then, right? So being able to celebrate that, acknowledge that, that is very important. The second thing is inclusivity. So you can't go diverse without being inclusive. So first thing is, being inclusive. Starting from the bottom line to top, everyone should be able to have a say. And that means that, as much as there is a distinction between the bottom line and the top line in terms of rank and roles and all of that, when it comes to interactions, that distinction should not show up. They should be able to comfortably, interact and have a conversation with their leadership. They should not think, oh, this person is at a certain level. And that's where humility, I think, comes into play of leaders, right? High level of integrity. So, as I said earlier, doing the right thing even when no one is watching, that is very important. And it's not just to show external people or stakeholders, but it's about, as a person, what level of integrity do you have? And if nobody was watching, would you do the right thing? And that's the kind of people and leaders, if we have in the organization, employees are going to see and they're going to imbibe that. Uh, Lastly, I would say servant leadership. That's a topic that has come up a lot in the last few years. I think leaders who practice servant leadership, they are extremely popular. They are highly influential, and that's because they don't believe in leading by giving commands or orders. They believe in leading by empowering their team members, by providing support resources. They're the ones who are actually standing at the end of the line, I would say, and then just wishing well their teams and just providing that support and motivation. It's like how parents, they stand on the sidelines and they cheer their kids when they are in a sports race or something. It's like that. Those are the kind of leaders I'm talking about when we say servant leadership. So that's very crucial.
Right. And this is more of a reflection question for you over the years that you have worked with, all kinds of companies, global MNCs. What if I were to ask you the three takeaways that you could sort of distill your HR career into? What would those three lines be?
Okay, that's a tough one
Yeah.
because there are so many things that can that come into my mind. But the first thing would be a business partner, not be operational. And when I say be a business partner, try and understand your business. Try to know more about your business. What are the challenges? What are the highlights? The product that you have. Because if you know about those things, you'll think like a business, and that's where you add value. So when I say be a business partner, think like business. The second thing would be if you have a seat on the table, don't lose that seat. We've been talking about let's have a seat on the table. We don't have a seat on the table. Businesses don't understand us. We do have a seat on the table. So if you have a seat on the table, don't lose that seat. And if you don't have a seat on the table, find out why you don't have one. We can't be saying that businesses don't see us as an important business partner or as a business partner. There is a reason why they don't. Possibly there is a need for education. Possibly there's a need for awareness. Possibly there's a need for visibility or some value add. Figure out why you don't have that space. And then, do things to find that space for yourself, that voice for yourself. Because if you don't have that, you will remain a back end process. And that is not what HR is. Uh, Lastly, I would say invest in yourself. As HR, we curate programs for employee development, leadership development. But what about us? So a lot of times we kind of overlook our own development. So I would say for HR practitioners and for HR leaders, invest in your teams, be it mental well-being, be it physical well-being, be it some developmental programs. Allow them to upskill themselves because that's the only way you can actually be a true business partner.
Right. I think those are three very pithy, takeaways. But what that has done is, brought another follow-up question for me. So if you're talking about, leaders and managers being able to develop trust, right, build that trust among their people. What you are talking about is, business needs to develop that trust in HR. So, similarly, how do you actually, operationalize this, right? One is that yes, there is a trust deficit. So obviously, trust needs to improve. How does business trust HR, or how do, or and is there a parallel with leaders trying to, gain the trust of their teams? Is there something, similar there, or are they two very different things? Comment on both.
So I'll take it in two parts.
Yeah.
And the first thing I would say is there is a difference.
Okay.
There is a difference. And the first I'll take the HR piece. So if the leaders are not seeing us as a business partner, as I said earlier, that's because either we don't understand the business or we don't understand how the leaders operate. And at the same time, we are not confident enough to communicate because there is a lack at our end.
Hmm.
Right? And that could be understanding the business, that could be understanding of what the potential challenges, expectations, or it could be simply our inability to communicate what works and what doesn't work. So, as HR business partners, it's very important, as I said earlier, to upskill ourselves, to understand the business right, so that you can add value, and also challenging the status quo, to be able to say no, but to know when to say no. You can't be saying no to everything. So this is something as a learning I got from one of my professors from Temple University. He said, the first 6 months as an HR practitioner, you never say no. Because then when you say no, people will say, oh, there is a reason why she's saying no. She never says no. And people will buy that. So that's very important to know when to say no, but not always say no. Then when it comes to employees, I would say that trust element that has been a challenge and a matter of a topic of conversation for a very long time, and especially because of pandemic, I think it has come up more so. So it's a two-way process, and I remember there was a research that was done where people shared that 45% of the people shared that lack of trust in leadership is detriment to their work. They feel less motivated, they feel unproductive. And a lot of leaders expect the teams to trust them. But there is, and this is something that I asked recently to a leader. I said, do you trust them? Because the leader kept saying that, they don't trust me. And I said, do you trust them? And the response that I got was not very convincing. But that's the thing, they feel it. As human beings, we feel the vibe, we feel the energy. So if you're not trusting me, I will have that uncertainty and I will not trust you. So it's a two-way process, and this has been there. But as I said earlier, highly emotional intelligent leaders, they're pretty good at managing this, even if they are new, because they know how to navigate through these uncertainties and challenges, and they try to use their level of emotional intelligence to understand about each and every person in the team, what drives them, what are their motivators, what are their challenges, without questioning their ability to perform well, to work well.
Right. Yeah. And another follow-up question. These days, empathy is again something that we hear a lot. But sometimes there is a genuine challenge for people at the decision-making levels because they've not been through the kind of situations that their team members are going through. You could actually have things, everything from ageism, right? I mean, there are people that I know who are in leadership positions whose children and their classmates are now working in the same companies. So obviously, there's a difference in generation, the way they think, what they've been exposed to, the way they decide, the way they multitask, all this millennials and all that talk that we have. That's a genuine sort of challenge for people. And with the pandemic, socio-cultural, backgrounds and contexts are also very different. In this kind of a situation, how do people actually develop that empathy? Right? How do I know how a 22-year-old, if I'm a 55-year-old leader, how does a 22-year-old person joining from campus think? How do I even answer that question?
So I think organizations who really want to cultivate a culture of empathy, the first thing is talking about it, making it visible. When I say making it visible, talking about it's required, it's needed, why it's needed. Because unless you talk about it, you show that it matters, nobody is going to really care. So that's very, very important that you talk about, the fact that you want to be an organization that practices empathy, why it is important, what changes it's going to bring. Then being present, that's very important. Being available, and this is for leaders, this is for management, where you can say that we want to be an empathetic organization and all of that, but uh, are you present? Are you available when people need you? And then if you're available, are you curious about what's happening with them? Because that's where the investment comes into play. So if you're not curious about what's happening, and when I say curious, it's again not getting private with somebody, but if being able to understand somebody's body language, being able to understand somebody's behavior, when you're day in day out working with somebody, you kind of start paying attention to how somebody acts or reacts. So those non-verbal cues, are you able to uh, you know uh, are you able to understand those, identify those? Because somebody could be in a normal day behaving in a certain manner, but all of a sudden for a week or so they've started displaying a very different way of behavior, or some issues with their temper. Then that is a sign that there is something wrong. Are you able to identify that as a leader? Right? That is again empathy, because you're being mindful, you're being proactive. So we need to encourage our leaders to pay attention to those non-verbal cues. We need to encourage our leaders to pay attention to things which are not being discussed in a meeting. So having that kind of a gut feeling or a sixth sense. Uh, Another thing is, being vulnerable. I am a person who is generally sold on vulnerability, because I feel that that brings out the realness in a person. So being vulnerable, uh, and when I say being vulnerable, being emotional, it's not about crying or something, but being able to courageously talk about some of the things where you failed possibly, or some of the challenges that you failed. Because people don't dislike you for sharing your vulnerable stories, they like you more. It allows you to build trust. So doing that, being genuinely open to feedback and ideas, because that shows humility, that shows self-awareness. It doesn't bring you down, or it doesn't make you less of a leader. It just shows that you're open to ideas and feedback from everybody, and it's one team. Organizations can look at building programs where employees can understand how to apply emotional intelligence, and how to build that empathy culture so that they can support their colleagues. Because empathy is not just for you, not just for me. It also is a way of understanding how our colleagues are feeling so that we can support them. Because you never know who's fighting what battle, right? Uh, Showing appreciation, even if it's small, celebration, a very small thing it could be, but showing appreciation really uplifts a person. So if you are able to do that, that shows that the person value matters. You value that person. And as I said earlier, being able to care for somebody personally, making time, even if it's 10 minutes, 15 minutes, to just pick up the phone and say, hi, hey, how you doing? It could be that somebody's wife is not well, or it could be somebody's son, it was their son's first day at school, and they shared it with you. And even if it may not seem like a very crucial piece of information, just a part of their day-to-day life, but if you were to remember and just ask them, they'll be very happy. They'll feel surprised that you remember that. And that's again a mark of empathy, or I would say humility.
Right. Yeah, I think the big takeaway that I'm taking from this is just bringing that to the fore, right? The fact that there are differences and you need to be empathetic, I think that's the first step. Bring that to the fore, make it part of the narrative, let people connect to each other at a more human level, engineer opportunities for people to connect with each other. Like one of our clients was saying, you have APIs for programs to talk to each other. We still don't have APIs for humans, and that's what I think you need to do. So if you are able to build those APIs, everything is sorted. Yeah. So one of the final questions right now. So what are the books, podcasts, courses, people who have shaped your thinking, and whom would you recommend to our listeners and viewers?
That's a very interesting one, Harish, because over the last many years, I've evolved from being a voracious reader. I used to read. I mean, I used to read so much that I used to say that I drink up books. But from being that kind of a voracious reader, I've evolved to be now a listener or an observer. I don't read much, to be very honest, and that surprises people. But what happens is, I don't read a book, but there is social media, there are so many channels. So I just look at things and I try to. It's like uh, taking a leaf of learning out of something, just lodging it in my subconscious and just moving forward with it. That's what I do. And trust me when I say it, I have a very good memory, but I never remember movie names, I never remember book titles. uh, I just remember something small from a book or something, and that's about it. But if I have to give you names of some things that I would say, okay, I would read possibly something that may surprise you is I've always been fascinated by Bhagavad Gita since I was a kid. And there used to be this painting in my house which had one of the shlokas. And at that point of time, I did not even know what it meant because it's Sanskrit. But I would just read it in Sanskrit and just walk away. But I kind of realized that I was always fascinated, and it had nothing, or it has nothing to do with the culture or the religion that I've been raised into, because I'm pretty secular that way. I go to mosque and gurdwaras and everything, but it's just that I find it to be very practical in nature, and I think it applies even more so in today's world, where we talk about being unconditional, being selfless, or doing things for others, or being kind to each other, or what you do comes back to you, things like those. I, and as I was growing, and I realized that that's those are the learnings that I was taking from that book. Having said that, I can't read the original Bhagavad Gita, not at all. I don't have the mental bandwidth for that. I've gotten my learnings from different soaps that you watch, or different mythological serials that you watch. But I really wanted to get hold of Bhagavad Gita in some simplified version or form, which actually happened because uh, Radhi Devlukya Shetty, she apparently shared 5 top books that she recommended. And one of them was a simplified version of Bhagavad Gita, which is available on Amazon in blue color. And the moment I saw it, I was like, okay, I want this because, it's simplified, it's easy, and I can understand. Uh, then, there are so many other books like Lean In from Sheryl Sandberg, which talks about, choosing work as well as family uh, when it comes to women, right? Or there are books from Michelle Obama, which is The Becoming, that I've read. But I also like, the human stories that you come across possibly on LinkedIn or some other platforms. One example would be, about Padma Shri Dr. Kalpana Saroj, how she rose from where she was to to be the chairperson of Kamani Tubes, and that's incredible. And I do have people in my life, friends, who've actually gone from rags to riches. So that's something, as I said earlier, vulnerability. I'm sold on it, and I love that. And one last book possibly I can recommend is something which was given to me by my ex-manager. It's from Hemant Sunim, the author of Love for Imperfect Things, and the book is The Things You Can See Only When You Slow Down. It's I personally like it because some days when you feel a little chaotic mentally, uh, I would just go and open one random page, and there is something written which could be totally unrelated to how I'm feeling, but still there is something beautiful in those lines that you can pick up and you can say, that uplifts me.
Okay, I think these are very useful recommendations, which we will add to our show notes along with links for people to purchase. So coming to the end of this conversation, we will want you to give your hot takes on certain things, words, topics, themes that I will ask you about. So I will be asking about what is the future relevance of each of these things. So the first one, what do you think is the future relevance of gig economy?
So I would say that, people want that autonomy. People want the freedom to be able to work, be able to earn, but also at the same time enjoy life. And post-pandemic, no, post-pandemic, yes, it's become more important for everybody. So it's going to be there, but I don't think people are going to leave corporate roles too. They may go in for a part-time role, they may go in for a blend, but people would want to have something on the sidelines for them to some additional revenue stream coming in, so that if times were to change, like what happened in 2020, they can fall back on that and they don't have to worry about what if I get fired from a job.
Okay, what do you think is the future relevance of LinkedIn as a platform?
LinkedIn is amazing. LinkedIn is great. I'm just not sure if it's becoming Facebook of professional networking. Sometimes I feel like that, not all the times. The content is amazing. There are a lot of things to learn. There are good trainings available. A lot of events have started happening on LinkedIn because they provide that platform. I really like stories where people talk about themselves or their journey, or something else where you see that humane connection. But at the same time, I think people also need to realize that you don't have to wish your wife happy birthday on LinkedIn. It's not Facebook.
Okay, I guess what you're saying is you want LinkedIn to come up with the secret feature of deleting these kind of birthday wish posts and good morning tweets.
I wouldn't say that, that they should do it. There is no suggestion in this, but I think it's about people being more mindful about why each platform exists, why it came into existence, how it adds value, and not just keep, spamming everyone with content which may not be relevant or which could be personal. That's all.
Right. Yeah. Okay, and the final one, left of field, what do you think is the future relevance of Bollywood with all the OTTs and regional language cinema becoming more and more popular? What do you think is the future relevance of Bollywood?
I have no take there because whatever I'm going to say is not going to be right. But all I would say is, please keep giving us more cinema, more movies, and I'm somebody who, unlike a lot of my friends, I don't judge a movie and say, oh, this was such a waste of time. It really has to be a very, very, very badly done movie or a very boring movie for me to say that. So I keep my brain at home when I watch a movie. I mean, I don't put sense into it. So I'm happy with, if it's on OTT or if it's in theaters, whatever is, whatever helps me to forget the day-to-day work and stress. That's good for me when it comes to Bollywood.
Okay, all right. On that note, I think this is a great conversation, Dina, where we moved from empathy, people building trust, HR, how should they find a seat on the table or at least retain it. I think we covered a whole range of topics, starting from culture debt, right? That's where we started. How can how do companies end up incurring culture debt, and what should they do about it? So I think we covered a whole range of topics, and there should be a lot of actionable takeaways for a lot of founders and leaders who I know will be listening to this podcast. So thanks a lot for this great fun conversation.
Thank you very much, Harish, for inviting me. I had full fun, so thank you very much, and I hope whatever I shared is of use to whoever is listening to us.
Yeah, thank you. If you like this, we know you care about your and your team's future relevance. You can find us and click on the subscribe button on YouTube, Spotify, Google and Apple Podcasts. You can also find us on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. There are two ways to enter the insider group of friends of CTQ. A Telegram channel where you'll get daily tidbits that help you think about future relevance, and our weekly email newsletter called The Upleveler. We've got some fabulous testimonials from our subscribers. We share special discount codes for CTQ compounds and exclusive invitations to our events on both these channels. Just go to choosetothink.com, that is think with a Q, and you'll find all the links to subscribe. You owe it to yourself.